You are getting ready to listen to the voice of Dr. Rhadi Ferguson, 2004 Olympian, four-time national judo champion, Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, author, speaker, and coach.
Welcome to another edition of Coffee with Rhadi, and today I want to talk about rhetorical dodgeball, the art of evasion in the age of anti-expertise. Now, every year, usually on some of my social media outlets, I like to talk about the death of expertise, which was an article and then became a book by Tom Nichols. What he talks about is the rise of anti-intellectualism in the social media age and space. And today, as a professor, a professional educator, and someone who has dedicated his life to both academic rigor and real-world expertise, I often find myself entangled in online discussions that feel less like intellectual exchanges and more like a game of rhetorical dodgeball, a game where facts, logic, and expertise are systematically avoided in favor of deflection, false equivalencies, and bad faith questioning. This phenomenon isn't just frustrating, it's emblematic of a larger social shift that Tom Nichols expertly dissects in his book, The Death of Expertise. We are living in an era where the value of knowledge has been undermined, where lived experience and academic credentials are dismissed, and where the loudest voice often drowns out the most informed one. As a Howard University graduate, particularly in the discussions about race, history, black studies, black history, I find this pattern even more exhausting. Howard University, an institution that has produced some of the greatest minds in these fields, has instilled in me a deep understanding of both the academic and cultural nuances that shape these discussions. Yet, time and time again, I encounter people who believe that doing their own research, which often means skimming some YouTube videos or getting it on Google or looking at some conspiracy blogs, makes them just as qualified to debate these topics as someone who has spent decades studying, reading, teaching, and applying these particular principles, and someone who has, at the age of 49, lived these particular experiences. Now, here's some of the tactics of rhetorical dodgeball that really pissed me off. In these discussions, certain tactics emerge repeatedly, revealing a commitment to the evasion of the topic rather than enlightenment or engagement. You have the endless interrogator, the person who refuses to engage in discourse by presenting their own argument. Instead, they bombard you with endless questions like, well, don't you think it's interesting how, or, but why do you say that? Or don't you find it odd that? The goal isn't to seek clarity. It's to force you into an exhausting cycle of answering while they never defend their own position. Then there's the false equivalency artists. These individuals create a superficial comparison between two vastly different things to undermine valid points. Well, isn't everything racist then? Why are we talking about systemic racism when there are rich black people? There can't be rich black people if systemic racism exists. And then they flatten complex issues into sound bites, refusing to engage in deeper, layers of historical context, policy implementations, or socioeconomic structures. It's frustrating. Then you have the anecdotal evidence evangelists. No matter how much research, statistical, or historical evidence you present, this person leans on personal anecdotes. Well, my friend is black and he doesn't think racism is real. Or they lean on, the Lil Wayne argument, where Lil Wayne says he never experienced racism in his life. Or I've never seen this happen, so it must not be true. In The Death of Expertise, Nichols emphasizes how people increasingly prioritize their own personal experience over hard data, even when the data comes from decades of research and institutional knowledge. Then you have this is my favorite. This happens to me all the time. You have the credential dismisser. Here's one that I encounter often. The moment someone realizes that they're debating a professor, an Olympian, a peer reviewer of academic journals, a professional educator, a teacher, a coach, they pivot from the topic at hand to attacking the very idea of expertise itself. Well, just because you have a degree doesn't mean you're right. Or, yeah, you learned that in school, but you're part of the system. Of course you would say that. This is where Tom Nichols' argument becomes painfully relevant. People aren't just skeptical of expertise, they are outright hostile toward it. The idea that someone who has spent years mastering a subject might actually know more than they do is perceived as an insult rather than a reality. The frustration of engaging in good faith is something that I deal with often. And let me circle back. It's because these individuals, and I'm going to say it again, they have this idea that someone who has spent years mastering a subject might actually know more than they know. And that to them is a perceived insult rather than a reality. And for someone like me who is, I'm deeply invested in education, both in academia and practical coaching. The shift in discourse is just maddening. Now, I welcome debate. I don't mind it. I also welcome critical thinking. But what I cannot deal with is the deliberate refusal to engage in good faith, to not provide the conceptual framework from which you are speaking from. What makes this even more difficult is that as a black academic from Howard University, there's an added layer of dismissal. Discussions about racism, history, and structural inequality often turn into a spectacle of willful ignorance, where my credentials and knowledge just don't go unrecognized. They are actively devalued with comments like, well, you're not so smart for somebody with a doctorate degree or with a PhD. And I say, there's an embedded assumption that my perspective is somehow biased, while the perspective of someone who has read a few contrarian articles on Twitter or listened to a few videos on YouTube is supposedly neutral and valid. So what's the solution here? Well, Tom Nichols in his book argues that the path forward requires reasserting the value of expertise and pushing back against the idea that all opinions are equally valid, because all opinions aren't equally valid. This doesn't mean silencing dissent. It means holding people to a standard of intellectual honesty. Asking somebody, how many articles have you read on this topic? How many articles have you written on this topic? How many classes have you taken on this topic? How many books have you read on this topic? How many experts have you spoke with on this particular topic? Are you an expert in this particular topic? And if so, how? If you want to have a discussion, bring facts, bring evidence, and be willing to engage in real debate, not rhetorical dodgeball. As frustrating as it is, I've learned to do a few things when engaging in these discussions. 1, call out the tactic directly. When someone starts playing dodgeball, I name it. You're asking leading questions instead of providing an argument. What's your actual point? Number 2, demand evidence. If they make a claim, the burden of proof is on them. You said systemic racism doesn't exist? Excellent. Show me the research that supports that particular conclusion. And disengage when necessary. Not every debate is worth having. If someone refuses to engage in good faith, I don't need to waste my time. At the end of the day, I take solace in the fact that I don't debate to win. I debate to educate. And those who genuinely want to learn will recognize the difference. But for the rhetorical dodgeball players, I have no interest in running around the court while they refuse to pick up the ball. I am Dr. Rhadi Ferguson. Have a great day, and remember, I love you, but God loves you best.
You are getting ready to listen to the voice of Dr. Rhadi Ferguson, 2004 Olympian, 4-time national judo champion, Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, author, speaker, and coach.